The content discussed in this video is presented strictly for the purposes of commentary, criticism, and review. All copyrighted materials referenced are used under the doctrine of fair use, as outlined in Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act. This channel does not claim ownership of any third-party works discussed. Views expressed are analytical, not personal endorsements of the material. The goal here is analysis and critique. Nothing more, nothing less. Let's get into it.
Oh, I want you to imagine a dragon for a second. Just close your eyes. Well, actually, if you're driving, please do not close your eyes.
Yeah, keep your eyes on the road.
Right, but visualize it in your head. What do you see?
Scales? Smoke? Probably sitting on a giant pile of gold in a cave somewhere.
Exactly, a monster. Something terrifying that needs to be slain by a hero in shiny armor so the village can be safe. That's kind of the default setting in our brains.
Oh, absolutely. It's the classic fantasy trope.
But I've got a stack of notes here for today's book dive, and the source material says we have got that image completely backwards.
It is a pretty radical flip.
It really is. Today we are diving into Dragon Time, Magic and Mystery of Menstruation by Luisa Francia. And the core premise here is going to sound wild at first. The dragon isn't a monster. The dragon is a biological reality. And the hero slaying it, that might actually be a crime scene.
It's definitely a literary crime scene. What Francia is doing here is really fascinating. She takes anthropology, mythology, and fairy tales, and she treats them all like evidence. She argues that the dragon is actually the ancient symbolic representation of menstruation.
Menstruation. So wait, Game of Thrones is actually about a biological cycle?
Haha, well, in a symbolic sense, yes. Francia argues that in ancient matrifocal societies, meaning cultures that focused on the Mother Earth, menstruation wasn't considered the curse. It was dragon time.
Dragon time, I kinda love that.
Right, it was viewed as a source of power, vision, and magic. But when history shifted toward patriarchy, the symbols of that power had to be rewritten. They had to be turned into monsters so they could be conquered.
Okay, so our mission today is to essentially map out this conquest. We're going to uncover the crime scenes of ancient myths where goddesses were turned into monsters. We're going to decode some very familiar fairy tales. B.
Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty specifically.
Yes, to find these hidden menstrual symbols. And finally, we will look at some of the practical, maybe somewhat intense rituals the author suggests for reclaiming that dragon energy.
Exactly. And, we should probably warn listeners up front, this isn't a medical textbook. We are looking at cultural coding. It's about how we tell stories about power.
So let's start with the dragon itself, because I think most people hear the word dragon and just immediately think of evil. Where does Francia say that comes from?
She points to pre-patriarchal cultures. So we're talking ancient China, really old European folklore. In those original stories, the dragon is the great mystery. It's the guardian of the pearl, the protector of fertile women. It represents the chaotic, life-giving force of the earth.
So it's a creator, not a destroyer.
Right, and the best example she gives to really ground this is the myth of Tiamat. This is from Babylon, which makes it one of the oldest written stories we have.
The Enuma Elish, right?
Exactly. Tiamat is the dragon mother of the deep salt waters. And the myth originally says she created the universe specifically from her menstrual blood.
Okay, pause there. Tiamat created the universe from menstrual blood? That is specific. And very, very different from the, let there be light version most people know.
It is. But if you think about the logic, if you are an ancient person, you see that women bleed without dying. And you see that blood is intrinsically connected to creating life. So it makes total sense to imagine the cosmos started in the exact same way. Tiamat was honored as the creator.
But then something changes.
The culture changes. The Babylonians get a new god, Marduk.
The new hero enters the chat.
The patriarchal hero. And Marduk is actually Tiamat's son in the myth, but he doesn't want to serve the mother. He wants to rule everything. So the story shifts. Suddenly Tiamat is painted as a monster, a demon that has to be stopped. Marduk fights her, kills her, and splits her body in two to make the heavens and the earth.
He literally builds the world out of her corpse.
It's incredibly violent imagery. And Francia argues this is the crime scene we were talking about. It marks the historical moment where a society decides that male order must dominate female chaos. The son kills the mother to take her power. He takes the creation, her body, but he destroys the creator.
It was a hostile takeover of the creation myth.
Precisely. And it's not just Tiamat either. The book mentions Medusa too.
Oh, Medusa. We all know the snake-haired monster who turns men to stone. She's usually depicted as just purely horrific.
Right. But Francia points out that originally, the Gorgon's Medusa and her two sisters, they were a triad of goddesses. They represented wisdom, strength, and the wide sea. And the snakes weren't scary. Snakes shed their skin. They are universal symbols of rebirth, just like the menstrual cycle.
But the new myths come in and turn that wisdom into a weapon.
Exactly. The wise gaze of the goddess becomes the deadly stare of the monster. And again, a male hero, Perseus, has to cut off her head to gain her power.
There's a really striking detail the author brings up here, about blood specifically. And it's kind of this ironic double standard that I had never really thought about before. You have these heroes like Siegfried or Hercules. They kill the dragon, and then what do?
They bathe in the blood. Siegfried literally bathes in dragon's blood to become invincible.
Right. They want the blood. They want it all over them.
That is the core paradox Francia highlights in the book. The patriarchy is obsessed with the power of the blood. They want the immortality, the life force, but they want it strictly on their terms. In these myths, and honestly throughout history, men are honored for spilling blood in war. That's heroic blood. It's death blood.
But when a woman bleeds naturally,
It's shamed. It's hidden away. It's dirty. So the hero wants to steal the immortality of the dragon blood by bathing in it, while simultaneously demonizing the actual women who produce it. It's a literal theft of power.
that is a heavy reframe. It's basically the culture saying, we want your magic, but we don't want you.
Exactly. And you see the sanitization of magic everywhere. Look at the transition from the cauldron to the grail.
Oh, I really like this part of the book dive, because when I think cauldron, I immediately think of Shakespeare, Macbeth, which is Eye of Newt, bubbling trouble, all of that.
Which is exactly the propaganda working. In Francia's analysis, the cauldron is the original primeval symbol of the womb. It's a heavy iron pot. It sits in the fire. You put raw ingredients in, they melt down, they transform. And something entirely new comes out. It's messy, it's hot, and it's deeply creative. It is the core tool of the wise woman.
It feels very earthy, very practical.
Very much so. But as the church and these new male-dominated stories took over, they couldn't have the holy vessel be a messy, bloody iron pot. So they introduced the Holy Grail, or the chalice.
Which is usually gold or silver and incredibly clean.
And ethereal. It holds wine that symbolizes blood, or it holds the blood of a male savior. It completely removes the biological reality of the womb and replaces it with a clean metaphorical object that men can guard and control.
So we went from a cooking pot that actually creates life to a shiny cup that just holds a symbol.
Yes, and the women who kept using the cauldron, they became the wicked witches. The author connects this directly to the witch trials, what she calls the burning times. She argues that the witch hunts were, at their core, a war against dragon time. It was an organized attempt to eradicate the women who understood herbs, lunar cycles, and that Colgan power of the body.
It really puts a much darker spin on the fairy tales we all grew up with. Speaking of which, we have to talk about Sleeping Beauty, because the book calls this section Fairy Tale Forensics, and the numbers she pulls out here are, well, they're suspicious.
They're very suspicious. This is honestly one of the strongest parts of Francia's argument. We all know the basic setup of Sleeping Beauty. The king and queen throw a party for their new baby, the princess. They invite the fairies, but how many?
Well, the king only has 12 golden plates, so they invite 12 fairies. And there's a 13th fairy who gets left out.
Right. Why those numbers? Why not 6 and 7? Francia says this is a calendar clash. The number 13 corresponds to the 13 moons in a lunar year, that is, the cycle of menstruation. The number 12 corresponds to the solar year, which is the calendar used by the patriarchy.
Okay, so by having only 12 plates,
the king is symbolically trying to erase the 13th moon. He is trying to banish the lunar cycle from his daughter's life entirely. He excludes the 13th fairy who represents the crone, or the wise woman aspect.
and that backfires on him immediately.
Spectacularly. The 13th fairy shows up anyway because you cannot stop biology, and she casts the curse. She says that in the princess's 15th year, she will prick her finger on a spindle and bleed.
Which is a metaphor for puberty.
Monarch. It's literal. The prick, the blood, it's her first period. And the king is so terrified of this biological reality that he burns every spindle in the kingdom. He is trying to stop his daughter from growing up from entering dragon time.
But she does prick her finger. She bleeds, and then she falls asleep. Now, usually we see this as a bad thing, right? She's comatose. She's a victim waiting to be saved.
But Francia flips that too. She argues the tower isn't a prison. It's the menstrual hut. The sleep isn't a coma. It's a trance. The text suggests that historically this time was viewed as a period of deep visioning, a time to go inward. The briar hedge that grows up around the castle, that's not a trap, it's protection. It's nature saying, she is in a sacred state, do not disturb.
But then here come the princes.
Right, the false princes. They try to hack through the thorns with swords. They try to use force to get in, and they get tangled up and die. The story is telling you that you cannot conquer the feminine mystery with aggression.
And the real prince?
He doesn't use a sword at all. He arrives only when the 100 years are up, when the cycle is complete. The thorns turn into flowers on their own and just let him in. It's a lesson in timing and sensitivity.
Wow, that makes so much more sense than just magic kiss wakes girl up. Yeah, it frames the entire narrative around her internal clock, not his arrival.
Exactly. He is secondary to the cycle.
But if Sleeping Beauty is about respecting the cycle, what on earth is Cinderella about? Because the analysis of the shoe, I have to admit, I had to read that page twice.
It's provocative for sure. Francia interprets the shoe as a symbol for the womb or the vagina.
Okay, you're gonna have to walk us through that.
So the prince is looking for a bride. He's looking for the specific foot that fits the shoe. Now, you have to remember the original Grimm brothers version, which is much, much bloodier than the Disney movie. The stepsisters try to fit into the shoe. What do?
They cut off their toes and their heels. And the shoe fills with blood.
Right. Now, in Francia's symbolic code, that blood represents menstruation. The stepsisters are bleeding women. They are sexually mature, they are in their power, and the prince explicitly rejects them. He is disgusted by the blood.
He wants the shoe to fit cleanly.
He wants a dry fit. Francia suggests this represents the patriarchal desire for a pregnant vessel. He doesn't want the bleeding, cyclic, wild woman. He wants the woman who fits the mother role perfectly, without the mess. He wants a tamed fertility.
Wow, and Cinderella fits that mold.
In the context of the story, yes. And notice the dresses. The book specifically mentions she has 3 dresses. One is the color of the sea, which is the unconscious. One is the color of the heavens, the soul. And one is the color of fire.
And fire is usually associated with the dragon, or passion, or menstrual blood.
Exactly. But she loses the shoe when she is fleeing in that state. She leaves behind the wild aspect to become the prince's wife. It's essentially a story of integration into the patriarchal order. Happily ever after means successfully tamed.
Man, that is depressing.
It is if you stop there. But the book doesn't just diagnose the problem. It tries to offer a solution. It asks, how do we wake the dragon up? How do we stop being Cinderella and start being the dragon mother?
And it briefly touches on some other dragon tales, where the hero doesn't conquer, right?
Yes, there's a great story about a youth serving the dragon mother. He succeeds not by killing her, but by serving her and respecting nature. He listens to the fish, the raven, and the fox. It emphasizes a matrilineal heroic path, a path of connection, rather than a path of conquest.
Which transitions perfectly into the practical side of the book. Francia talks a lot about reclaiming this energy through the concept of the menstrual hut. Now, practically speaking, I live in a modern apartment. I can't exactly build a mud hut in the backyard and vanish for 5 days a month.
And she knows that. But she uses the example of the Tuareg women in Algeria to show us what we've actually lost. This part was mind-blowing to me. She spent time with them in the Sahara, and she observed that during their periods, they don't use pads or tampons at all.
Wait, at all?
No. The text says they have such a deep connection with their bodies, such intense muscular control, that they can actually tense their muscles to hold the flow and release it only when they choose to.
That sounds completely impossible to a modern listener.
It sounds like a superpower, and in their culture, it is viewed as one. They separate themselves, they gather together, they laugh. They view it as a time of open sexuality and high energy. It's the exact opposite of shame. They haven't been taught that their bodies are leaking or dirty. They've been taught that this is a time of concentrated power.
Okay, so how do we translate that? If we can't do the muscle control thing immediately, and we can't vanish into the desert, what is the modern version of the hut? How does she suggest we replicate this?
It's about creating a psychological hut. It's about creating a boundary. Francia argues that our modern world is obsessed with solar energy. Constant output, bright lights, 9 to 5 productivity always being on. But dragon time is lunar. It's dark, it's cyclical, it requires rest.
So it's about giving yourself permission to just be off.
Literally and metaphorically. Taking time for solitude, she suggests going into the dark, turning down the lights, avoiding the constant stimulation of screens. She believes that during this time, the veil between the conscious and unconscious mind is very thin. If you numb that state with painkillers and override it with caffeine just to keep working your corporate job, you miss the download.
You miss the vision.
Right. She says the bleeding time is for receiving ideas. It's for visioning. The rest of the cycle is for doing, for executing those ideas. If you skip the receiving part, you're just running on fumes.
She has some specific exercises for this too. I really like the association game. It felt like something you could actually do in 5 minutes at your desk.
It's a fantastic way to dig into your subconscious. You write a trigger word at the top of a blank page, like blood or womb, and then you instantly branch out and write 2 words that come to mind, then 2 words for each of those. You build a pyramid of associations.
You might find that under blood, you don't write life. You write pain or stain or shame.
Exactly. It exposes the cultural programming. Once you see it on paper, you can change it. She also talks about intentionally reclaiming the color red. In our culture, blue liquid is used in tampon commercials. We sanitize it. She says, use red, wear red clothes, drink red juice, paint with red, stop hiding it.
It's almost a form of visual protest.
It's an affirmation. It's telling the dragon, I see you. It's about not buying into the idea that you need to be clean and sterile to be acceptable.
So if we zoom out and look at this whole journey, we've gone from Tiamat creating the universe to Sleeping Beauty's tower, and finally to this idea of a modern, psychological retreat. What is the big takeaway here? If someone listening isn't particularly spiritual or isn't into goddess rituals, why does this matter to them?
I think the real so what? Here is the psychological reframe. You don't have to believe in the Babylonian goddess Tiamat to get profound value from this text. Right now, millions of people view menstruation as a passive suffering. It's a hassle, it's pain, it's a biological malfunction.
It's something that just happens to you, and you just have to get through it.
Francia is offering a way to turn that passive suffering into an active practice. The cramps aren't just random pain, they're a signal from the body demanding rest. The moodiness isn't craziness, it's a lowered tolerance for nonsense. It's a truth-telling mechanism.
That is such a powerful shift. Instead of saying, I am sick, it's saying, I am in a heightened state.
Exactly. It turns a perceived liability into an asset. It turns the monster back into the guardian. It suggests that the very thing society told you was a weakness is actually a source of ancient, suppressed strength.
I want to leave you, the listener, with an image from the very end of the book. The author describes an anecdote where she is camping in the Sahara in the Tassili Mountains. It's night. She's looking at these massive, strange rock formations, and she sees them as sleeping dragons. And she writes, of the dragons want to wake.
And she asks that central echoing question, why do dragon slayers roll around in dragon blood?
Because they know the power's there. They just tried to steal it instead of feeling it. So the challenge for you to mull over on your own is this. What happens if you stop trying to slay the dragon? What happens if you stop fighting the cycle and actually listen to what it's trying to tell you?
That's where the real magic is.
Something to think about in the dark. Thanks for book diving with us today.
See you next time. That's all for today's book dive. If something we said made you think, or made you uncomfortable, that's exactly the point. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Hit subscribe so you never miss a dive, and if you liked this one, the like button does more than you think. We'll see you in the next chapter.